Imagine coming home early, expecting to surprise your wife, only to find her in the arms of another man. That's exactly what happened to me. But the betrayal wasn't even the worst part. Everyone knew except me. She didn't just leave me. She took everything. My money, my dignity, my future. But what she didn't realize is that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Stay with me, because this is a story of revenge you won't forget. Caleb Mitchell pulled into the driveway of his modest home, the rumble of his old pickup fading as he shut off the engine. The scent of oil and metal still clung to his clothes, a familiar reminder of another long day at Mitchell's auto repair, where he spent most of his waking hours. Tonight, though, was different. He had managed to leave early, a rare occurrence, and had even stopped to pick up a bouquet of sunflowers, knowing how much his wife, Lauren, loved them. It was Valentine's Day. The air was crisp, the sky darkening as Caleb stepped toward the front door, a slight grin playing on his face. He hadn't had much time for surprises lately, but tonight he wanted to change that. He imagined Lauren's face lighting up when she saw him home earlier than usual, the warmth in her voice as she thanked him for the flowers. But as he reached for the doorknob, something made him pause. Laughter. A deep, unfamiliar voice mixed with Lauren's, carrying through the house. It wasn't the casual chuckle of a phone call or a conversation with a friend. It was intimate, filled with a kind of closeness that made his stomach tighten. His hand lingered on the knob. Something felt off. Caleb had spent years diagnosing problems under the hoods of cars, listening to the smallest misfires, sensing when something was just a little bit wrong. That same instinct now sent a cold wave through him. Still, he turned the key and stepped inside. The laughter grew louder as he moved down the hallway, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. His eyes landed on the living room, and in that instant, everything changed. Lauren was standing there, wrapped in the arms of a man he had never seen before. The stranger was tall, well-dressed, the sharp cut of his suit standing in stark contrast to Caleb's grease-stained work clothes. His hand rested on Lauren's waist, far too familiar, far too comfortable. In his other hand was a bouquet of roses, bright and extravagant, making Caleb's sunflowers feel almost pathetic in comparison. They hadn't even noticed him yet. The world around him slowed, his breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a choke. Lauren wasn't pulling away. She wasn't pushing the man aside. She was leaning in, her fingers brushing against his chest, her expression one of quiet affection. Then she saw Caleb. She didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. If anything, she seemed resigned. The stranger, however, turned with a smirk, his confidence unwavering. "You must be Caleb," he said casually, as if they were meeting under normal circumstances. "I've heard a lot about you." Caleb's fists clenched. He was not the kind of man who let his emotions take over, but right now every part of him screamed to do something, to react, to lash out, to demand an explanation. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to Lauren, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. She met his gaze, and in that moment, she confirmed everything he feared. "Caleb, she started, but he didn't need to hear it. 3 years. That's how long it had been going on." The words left her lips without hesitation, as if she had already accepted this moment, as if she had rehearsed this conversation in her head long before he ever stepped through the door. 3 years. Nearly half their marriage built on lies. The man, Jason Langford, some doctor from her hospital, placed a hand on Lauren's back, a silent reminder that she had already made her choice. Caleb barely heard what he said next, something about packing her bags, about leaving this dead-end life behind. His fingers tightened around the bouquet in his hand, the petals crumpling, the stems bending beneath his grip. Lauren hesitated for the briefest moment, her gaze flickering between them. Maybe, for a second, she considered staying. Maybe, for a second, she remembered the life they had built together. But it wasn't enough. She grabbed her purse, her movements quick, deliberate. "I'll come back for my things later," she muttered, not even looking at him. Then she was gone. Caleb stood there in the empty house, staring at the front door that had just closed behind her. His sunflowers hung limply in his hand, petals falling one by one onto the floor. The silence was deafening. The house, their house, suddenly felt too big, too empty, as if all the warmth had been sucked out in an instant. He didn't know how long he stood there before finally moving, before his legs carried him to the couch where Lauren had been just moments ago, where the scent of another man's cologne still lingered in the air. The weight of everything hit him at once. The betrayal, the humiliation, the fact that the woman he had loved had not only left him, but had done so without a second thought. Days passed in a blur. He barely ate, barely slept. He went to work, but the motions felt mechanical, empty. The anger burned beneath the surface, mixing with the pain, but he didn't know where to put it. It wasn't until he overheard the whispers at the diner that everything truly broke. Sitting at the counter, he heard a group of nurses from the hospital chatting a few booths away. "Did you hear? Lauren finally left him. Honestly, I don't know why she stayed that long." Everyone knew about her and Jason. Laughter. Casual, cruel. The worst-kept secret in town. Everyone knew. Except him. He left his food untouched. His stomach twisted in knots. He barely remembered the drive to the bank. But when he checked their joint account, the reality was waiting for him. Their savings gone. The money they had spent years putting aside for a future they were supposed to build together, Lauren had drained it the day after she left. And just like that, something inside him snapped. The pain was still there, but it was changing, hardening. Lauren and Jason had walked away without consequences, without a care in the world, as if he had been nothing more than an obstacle in their perfect little plan. They had taken his love, his trust, his dignity, his money, but they weren't going to get away with it. Not anymore. For the first time since that night, Caleb felt clear-headed. His thoughts sharpened, focused. He didn't care about closure. He didn't care about moving on. He wanted payback, and he was going to make sure they felt it. The days blurred together. Caleb went to work, came home, and stared at the empty spaces where Lauren's things used to be. He wasn't sleeping. He barely ate. The house was too quiet, too cold. He told himself that it would get easier, that the pain would dull, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her walking out that door. At Mitchell's auto repair, his performance slipped. Simple mistakes piled up. Forgetting to tighten a bolt, misdiagnosing an engine problem, zoning out when customers spoke to him. His boss, Dwayne Porter, had always been a tough but fair man. But after Caleb botched a routine transmission replacement, even he couldn't ignore it. "You've got 4 weeks to get your head straight," Dwayne warned, arms crossed over his grease-streaked uniform. "I get that you're going through something, but I can't afford mistakes. You mess up again, you're out." Caleb nodded, barely hearing him. His mind wasn't on work. It was back at the bank, back at that screen showing a balance of 0. Lauren had drained every last cent. At first, he had told himself it wasn't about the money. It was about the betrayal, the humiliation. But the more he thought about it, the more that rage festered. She had left him with nothing. Not just emotionally, but financially. She had walked away with her new man, never looking back, while he was left to pick up the shattered remains of their life. And then came the final straw. One evening, exhausted and craving something greasy, he stopped at Miller's Diner, the only place in town open late. He slid into a corner booth, waiting for his order, when the sound of laughter caught his attention. A group of nurses sat at a table nearby, chatting over milkshakes and fries. He wasn't listening at first, until he heard Lauren's name. "Finally left Caleb," one of them said between sips of soda. "About time," another chuckled. "She and Dr. Langford have been together forever." Everyone knew. The worst-kept secret in town. Caleb's grip tightened around his glass. Everyone knew, except him. They had been laughing at him. Behind his back, at work, in their social circles. He had been the fool, the clueless husband who never saw it coming. He shoved his plate aside, appetite gone, and walked out into the cold night air. His feet carried him without thought, the rage boiling over in his chest. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about payback. His truck roared to life as he pulled out of the diner's parking lot, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He needed to think. He needed a plan. He needed to make them pay. The first stop was the bank. He had expected to see a withdrawal, maybe a few large transfers. Instead, what he saw made his blood freeze. $50,000. Gone. Drained the day after she left. The money they had saved for a house upgrade, a vacation, emergencies, it was all gone. She hadn't just left him. She had robbed him blind. His stomach twisted. There was no getting that money back, no legal way to undo what she had done. But he knew one thing. If Lauren and Jason thought they could walk away unscathed, they were dead wrong. For the first time in weeks, he felt clear-headed. No more moping. No more self-pity. It was time to act. But he couldn't do this alone. He needed someone who could help him channel this rage into something productive. Someone who wouldn't try to talk him out of it. That's when he found himself at the doorstep of Ryan Hale, his childhood friend turned therapist. Ryan listened in silence as Caleb spilled everything. The betrayal, the money, the whispers, the fact that Lauren and Jason were living happily ever after while he was drowning. When Caleb finally fell silent, Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a sigh escaping his lips. "I get it, man. I really do," he said. "But you need to move on. Revenge isn't going to fix this. It's just going to keep you stuck in the past." Caleb nodded, pretending to agree. But deep down, he knew moving on wasn't an option. Not yet. Because Lauren and Jason had stolen more than just his money and his pride. And he was about to take everything from them. Caleb had never been the kind of man to break the law. He had spent his life playing by the rules, working hard, and keeping his head down. But rules hadn't stopped Lauren from betraying him. They hadn't stopped Jason from walking into his life and taking everything. If they could get away with stealing his future, then why should he hold back? The idea came to him one night at Mitchell's auto repair while working late, trying to make up for the mistakes that had nearly cost him his job. He was elbow-deep in an engine when he overheard two truckers talking by the office. "Heard the Iron Serpents are having trouble moving their shipments," one of them muttered. "Yeah," the other chuckled. "Cops are all over the highways. Makes it tough for them to keep their side business running." Caleb had heard of the Iron Serpents before. A notorious biker gang, known for their involvement in smuggling and illegal trades. They weren't the kind of people you wanted to cross, but right now, they were exactly what he needed. The idea was dangerous, reckless. It went against everything he had ever believed in. But the thought of Lauren and Jason, living it up with his money, while he was barely holding his life together, that made the risk worth it. Over the next few days, Caleb did his research. He learned everything he could about the Iron Serpents, their operations, their rivals, their weaknesses. He figured out where they spent their time, who their key players were. Then he walked straight into their world. It was a Tuesday night when he pulled up outside the Rusty Chain, a rundown bar on the outskirts of town known to be a serpent hangout. The place reeked of stale beer and sweat, the low murmur of voices barely masking the tension in the air. Every instinct told him to turn around, to walk out before it was too late. But revenge had no room for fear. He spotted Axel Crane, the gang's leader, at a corner table, surrounded by a few of his men. The guy was massive, covered in tattoos, and had the kind of stare that could make a man second-guess his life choices. Caleb didn't hesitate. He walked straight to their table and made his offer. "I'm a mechanic," he said, keeping his voice steady. "A damn good one. I know you've been having trouble with your transports. I can help. Modify your bikes. Make them faster, stealthier. Add compartments no cop would ever find." Axel leaned back in his chair, studying him. "And why would a straight-laced mechanic want to get mixed up with us?" Caleb thought of Lauren draining their account. Thought of Jason's smug grin as he called his life a dead end. "Let's just say," he said, "I've got my reasons." For a long moment, Axel said nothing. Then he laughed. A deep, amused sound. "You got balls, I'll give you that," he said. "All right, you get one shot. One bike. Impress me and maybe we talk more." Caleb nodded, keeping his expression unreadable. As he left the bar, his heart was racing, but not from fear. He had just taken his first step down a dark path. And there was no turning back now. Caleb had always been good with his hands. Engines, wiring, hidden compartments. He knew how to make machines work for him. The bike Axel had given him was top of the line, but it had flaws. Within a few nights, Caleb modified it to run faster, quieter, and smarter, with secret compartments nearly impossible to detect. When he handed it back, Axel tested it himself, speeding down an empty road before returning with a nod of approval. "You might be useful after all," Axel said. "Let's see what else you can do." With that, Caleb was in. He wasn't interested in the money or the gang's loyalty. He didn't care about their operations. All he wanted was access. Access to the kind of people who could get things done. People who wouldn't ask questions. People who could help destroy Lauren and Jason. The plan unfolded in stages. First, their reputations. Caleb had spent years supporting Lauren's career, helping her through school, picking up extra shifts so she could chase her dream. Now he was going to rip it away from her. Using connections from the Iron Serpents, Caleb found someone who could get into the hospital's records. It took a few days, but soon he had everything he needed: access to Lauren's prescriptions, patient logs, and internal communications. With a few well-placed edits, it would look like she had been falsifying prescriptions, overprescribing medications, and manipulating patient records. He sent the fabricated reports to the hospital board anonymously. Within a week, she was put on suspension pending an investigation. But that was just the beginning. Jason was next. It wasn't enough to ruin his job. Caleb wanted to destroy his life completely. He knew Jason had skeletons in his closet. The guy was arrogant, reckless. He was too used to getting away with things. Caleb just had to give someone a reason to start digging. With the help of a serpent hacker named Ghost, Caleb got into Jason's emails and financial records. What he found made his blood boil. Jason had been funneling money through private accounts, making shady investments, and using Caleb's stolen savings to secure a future with Lauren. That future wouldn't exist much longer. Ghost helped him drain every last cent from those accounts, moving the money in a way that made it look like Jason and Lauren were involved in an elaborate fraud scheme. Then, using the same method he had used against Lauren, Caleb sent the evidence to the hospital, the IRS, and a few local news outlets. And just for good measure, he planted drugs in Jason's car. One anonymous tip later, Jason was pulled over after work. Caleb watched from across the street as cops searched the vehicle, saw the moment Jason realized what was happening. The flash of panic across his face as the officers found exactly what Caleb had left for them. They cuffed him on the spot. Lauren and Jason's perfect little world was crumbling, and Caleb wasn't done yet. The house they had planned to buy together? Denied. Their credit? Ruined. Their reputations? Shattered. Every job, every investment, every future plan they had built was turning to ash in their hands. For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt peace. But something in the back of his mind told him this wasn't over yet. Caleb had spent weeks orchestrating the perfect downfall, making sure Lauren and Jason lost everything. Their money, their reputations, their future. But just when he thought it was over, he realized he had underestimated the consequences. One night, after closing up the shop, he walked toward his truck, only to feel the air shift around him. Something was wrong. Before he could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. Lauren. Her face was pale, her once confident demeanor shattered. She looked exhausted, broken. The exact opposite of the woman who had walked out on him weeks ago without a second thought. "Caleb," she started, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you." He didn't respond. He just stared, waiting. She swallowed hard, rubbing her arms like she was trying to steady herself. "Everything's gone. Jason's in jail. The hospital is terminating my contract. I have nothing." Caleb crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I should have never left. You were always the one who cared, the one who—" "Stop." His voice was cold, calculated, like he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. For the first time in weeks, he felt nothing for her. No love, no pain, no regret. Only the satisfaction of knowing that she was finally feeling the weight of what she had done. She reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back. "You made your choice, Lauren," he said, his voice even. "And now you're living with it." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She knew it was over. With one final look, she turned and walked away, this time for good. Caleb watched her go, then exhaled slowly, letting the past slip away with her. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. The revenge was done. The battle was over. And he had won. But as he climbed into his truck and drove away, a thought lingered in his mind. Was it worth it? Because in the end, he had destroyed them, but a part of himself had been lost in the process. And there was no getting that back.